Hello! Optional props for this class are one yoga block and a blanket. However, all poses can be done without. We'll start our class today in child's pose. Option 2, layer the blanket underneath the knees if you'd like extra cushion. Knees can be together or maybe bring them out a little bit wider. A few breaths here, maybe close the eyes. You can tilt the head side to side. Stay here longer if you need. Or your next inhale lifts you up through tabletop. We'll take some movement through cat-cow. About 5 or 6 breaths here. As you inhale, you can drop the belly, open up through the chest. Exhale, press the floor away round through the spine. Any other movement, side to side, you can take some barrel rolls through the spine or maybe shift the weight forward and back. You can choose to stay here in cat-cow or we'll take a calf stretch. Meeting in tabletop. Extend your right leg out behind you. Tuck your right toes, plant them on the mat. Begin to shift your weight forward and back, stretching through the right side. You can point and flex the right toes, maybe pause as you shift the weight back to get a little deeper into the calf stretch. Eventually, we'll pause in our tabletop, keep that right leg extended. And we'll thread the needle, so take your left arm and thread it underneath the right shoulder. Right leg can stay extended. You have the option to lower the right knee if you prefer. Right arm can stay in front, option for a half bind. About 4 to 5 breaths here. And as you're ready, you can begin to unwind, lower the right knee down. You can take a counter twist as you open up over towards the left. Eventually, we'll take some movement through cat-cow as we pass through center, and we'll take that to the other side. And as you're ready, we'll extend the left leg back, tuck your toes. You can point and flex the toes, shift the weight forward and back, beginning to stretch out through the left calf. A few breaths here in this movement, or maybe you pause as you press into the left heel, really stretching through that left side. And when you're ready, we'll thread the needle. So we'll restack shoulders over wrists. This time we'll thread the right arm underneath the left shoulder. You can keep the left leg extended if you'd like, or lower the left knee. Left arm can stay extended out in front, or maybe you find a half bind, wrapping your left hand around the low back. A few breaths here. When you feel about even, you can begin to unwind, lower the left knee down. You can take a counter twist over towards the right as you extend the right arm up overhead. And passing through tabletop, any little movements here that you'd like. Option to meet in a downward facing dog if that feels restful to you. No rush to get there. We'll meet in half pigeon on the right. Bring your right knee to the outside of your right wrist. You can begin to draw the right shin forward towards the top edge of the mat. Shin doesn't have to be parallel, but just working in that direction. Make sure the right knee is out wide, hip points are squared, pointing forward towards the top edge of the mat. You have the option to slide a blocker blanket underneath the right hip if there's some space there to add a little support. A few breaths here. You can stay lifted onto the hands, option to eventually maybe lower down to forearms. You can slide a block underneath the forehead or maybe lower all the way down onto the mat. About 7 to 8 breaths here. We're over halfway, a few more breaths here. And taking your time, we're going to transition into a seated side bend. So taking your time, if you're not already there, we'll lift back up onto the hands. Shift your weight over onto the right hip, and then sweep your left leg towards the top edge of the mat until you're seated on both hips. Legs will be out into a V shape with that right leg bent in, sole of the right foot in towards the left thigh, left leg extends out long. We'll take a side bend over towards the left, so left hand can reach down over towards the left shin, ankle, or foot. Right arm sweeps up overhead, reaching in the direction of the left toes. A few breaths here so we can keep the chest squared open. So drawing the right shoulder back, maybe lift your gaze to help draw the right shoulder back, left shoulder under. About 3 or 4 more breaths. I'm going to transition this into a modified wild thing. So windmill the arms over towards the right, plant the right hand behind the hip, press into the right hand, lift your hips, lift up onto that right shin, find a little back bend as you press the hip points forward. Left arm lengthens up behind you, see if you can open up through the chest. You can take some movement circles through the left arm if you'd like, but 3 or 4 more breaths here. Eventually we'll lower the hips back down. We'll meet back in tabletop. You can take some movement through cat-cow or option to come back into downward facing dog. About 3 or 4 breaths here. Any movement that you need to even out before we take that to the other side. Whenever you're ready, we'll take our half pigeon on the left. So left knee will be placed to the outside of the left wrist. And then drawing the left shin forward towards the top edge of the mat. Again, does not have to be parallel towards the top edge of the mat, just working in that direction. Making sure your hips are squared, even, and grounded, so maybe sliding a blocker blanket underneath the left hip. Right leg extended out long behind you. You can choose to stay lifted onto the hands, maybe lower down to forearms. You can add a block underneath the chest or forehead. And take your time, about 7 to 8 breaths here. We're about halfway, about 3 to 4 more breaths. And take your time transitioning into that seated side bend. We'll lift back up onto the hands if you're not already there. Shift weight over towards that left hip and then sweep that right leg forward. Bring the sole of the left foot to meet the inner thigh of the right leg. Right leg extends out long. As you inhale, you can sweep the arms up overhead. And on your exhale, we'll hinge over towards the right, finding that side bend. Right hand can reach over towards the right shin, ankle, or foot. Left arm sweeps up overhead, reaching in the direction of the right toes. See if you can lift your chin out of the chest. And then maybe lift your gaze to draw your left shoulder back, right shoulder under. Try to keep the weight even through both hips. A few breaths here. Stay here longer if you need. Eventually, we'll meet in a modified wild thing. Windmill the left arm over towards the other side. Plant the left hand behind the left hip. Press into the hands and the left shin. As you lift your hips, find a little back bend. You can take some sweeping motions, circles through the right arm. A few breaths here. Stay here longer if you need. Otherwise, we'll eventually meet in child's pose. If you'd like, you can take some movement through cat-cow or down dog. About 4 to 5 breaths. You can choose to stay in child's pose. Otherwise, we'll make our way to hero's pose. We'll lift up onto the knees. You have the option to add the blanket underneath the knees if you'd like a little extra cushion. You can bring your knees about hip width distance, maybe a little bit wider than hip width distance. You have the option to take a block between the calves and the ankles and sit your hips back onto the block. Otherwise, we'll sit back in between the heels. You can use your hands to move the calves away from the midline to create some space to sit back between the heels. If one knee doesn't like this, you can extend that leg forward, out straight. If both legs are bent, you can choose to stay seated, shoulders stacked up over hips. Option to deepen by placing the hands behind you, beginning to walk the hands back. If knees begin to lift up as you shift your weight back, you can pause and then maybe walk the hands forward to keep the knees grounded. Otherwise, to go deeper, you can choose to lower down to the forearms, maybe slide a block underneath the back, or extend all the way flat onto the mat. About 5 to 6 breaths here. You can choose to stay here longer. If you feel ready, you can slowly begin to lift back up. You can walk the hands all the way forward. You can pass through cat-cow. Or maybe rock over onto the knees and windshield wiper the ankles side to side. And on your own time, we'll take a seated forward fold. This time we'll sweep the legs out in front. You can add a blanket underneath the hips. You can also roll the blanket a few times and layer it underneath the knees to keep from hyperextending the legs. You can take your hands and plant them on either side of the thighs as you press down, and maybe lift your hips, scoot them up and back. As you're ready, we'll inhale, sweep the arms up overhead. And exhale, begin to fold forward, nose to toes, chin to shin. About 5 or 6 more breaths here. About 2 or 3 more breaths. And take your time, we'll slowly begin to lift back up. We'll make our way onto our backs. You can hug your legs in towards the chest, windshield wiper the legs, or maybe find a happy baby. Eventually, we'll take a twist. You can take eagle legs if you'd like, right leg over, and lower the legs over towards the left. Gaze can stay lifted, maybe bring the gaze over towards the right. And take your time, begin to unravel the legs, come back through center. Option again, maybe happy baby or hug the legs in towards the chest. Eventually, we'll take that twist to the other side. If you're taking the eagle legs, this time we'll cross the left leg over. Wherever you are, let the legs fall over towards the right. Maybe gaze over towards the left. When you feel about even, we'll come back through center, unravel the legs, happy baby. And if you're not already there, we'll hug the legs in towards the chest. You can reach for the shins or maybe reach over the shins for opposite elbow. We'll take a big inhale as you squeeze the legs in towards the chest. And exhale, extend the arms and legs out long, Shavasana. We'll be here for about a minute. If you need additional time, you can pause the audio. Otherwise, I'll be here to bring you back into the space. Slowly begin to deepen into the breath. Option 2, hug the legs in towards the chest or extend the arms up overhead. If you'd like to end class in a seat, we'll make our way there. We'll close our class with a single breath. All together, we'll take a full breath in. Open mouth, let something go. Thank you so much for allowing me to share my practice with you today, and I hope to be with you next time you're on your mat.